So I actually want to bring up one more thing about this beach scene. Listen, it's been lodged in my mind since I watched it, and I didn't make room to talk about it properly in the comparison videos either. In hindsight, I could have just spent a few more minutes adding context there, but I'm a hack and unsatisfied with my own work constantly. I still wanted to lay on the table a better little blurb about why something about the beach scene bothers me. And honestly, after I've had all this time to process, I think it's not so much about the beach scene as much as the conversation around the beach scene. This scene where Rocky asks Grace if he'd like to return to Earth serves as a direct parallel to the time when Stratt asked Grace to go on a one-way trip and give up his life. And I like that parallel, I think it's nice, but I also noticed that people were taking a very different meaning away from it when I brought it up in conversation than what I was thinking of at the time. A specific take I've seen is that this "you have 3 hours" scene and "think about it a long time" are comparative points that can define Grace's relationship with Earth and Erid, and Stratt and Rocky respectively. The general idea being that Rocky and Erid respected Grace's autonomy and well-being, Earth and Stratt did not. And in conclusion, Grace is much better off on Erid than going to an Earth that didn't appreciate him. And while I do think that Grace is better off on Erid, it's not because I think Earth didn't have anything of value for him. And I don't think it's for a reason of lack of appreciation either. Before we go any further with this, the Petrova Task Force and Stratt do undeniably violate Grace's autonomy, choosing the sacrificial lamb that is him to save them. But there's a whole lot of layers to that 3 hours scene that to me mainly reflects a set of circumstances more than the quality of Grace's relationships. I've seen people drawing this comparison between the two scenes to show that Stratt and by extension Earth never cared about Grace. And a thing I think gets very muddied very quickly is, one, Grace's time on Project Hail Mary and with the Petrova Task Force is not his full relationship with Earth. But to be fair, it's the whole of Grace's life we get to see. The movie encourages this mixture of association, since of course we're not shown any of the life he had outside of the task force. We get a glimpse into his classroom, but we don't see him possibly having a normal life as a 7th grade teacher and a man in his 30s in a small town. The best we have is him reflecting vaguely on an experience he had with an ex. When on Earth, we see him being thrown onto a jet, and then there's 2 cups of coffee waiting for Stratt and nothing ready for Grace until after he's shoved into the boardroom meeting. It does seem like every time he's interacting with Earth, he's whisked away to a new area without being given all the information. Everything gets uprooted around him often and suddenly, and often his consent is pushed. Now he lives on a boat, or now he's thrown into a room that he has to present to, or now he's drafted onto a one-way trip. That's Earth to us. But the task force also isn't doing this because they don't respect Grace or are indifferent to him. Like even in that coffee scene, I went to go back and check, and they do get him the water eventually. We're shown that Grace has made a significant discovery and is put in a vital position. We're shown that all of these great leaders and thinkers of the world are intimidating but willing to reach back when Grace reaches out. We see a lot of people working with him on this project who don't belittle him or mock him. He's their head astrophage scientist, and he's credited for that. He teaches the astronauts. He's recognized for his abilities and achievements. They're perhaps not exactly friends at the end of the day, but they're friendly, and it feels evident that Grace's isolation comes from Grace himself having trouble with people. Which is okay, but that doesn't translate to Earth didn't care about him. The task force's dismissal of Grace's autonomy didn't come from an antagonistic place, but a place of needing to put him wherever he was most useful to the project and the collective in a stressful time. Which brings us to the Stratt of it all. Stratt was a woman in an impossible position who made all of the right calls for the sake of Project Hail Mary, but not for the sake of Grace. I think Stratt offering 3 hours after Grace asks if he can think about it is the best possible leeway she could have offered him. The illusion of letting this be his choice because you know she decided the moment she looked at him that this was it is kind of the best she could do. And the movie frames this as there really was no other viable option. They get rid of the name-dropped runner-up from the book to hide away the moral complexity and instead leave Stratt with Grace saying no, and then you'll figure it out.
You'll find a solution.
You are my solution.
It's Grace or no one for her, and it's not even by preference, it's by circumstance and force. Stratt is the one that blatantly ignores a runner-up because she wants the next most qualified person, not the second next most qualified. Which is a much more morally complex and interesting question of this whole circumstance, but Stratt is also the one who could wipe her boot with Grace's consent. Her reaction to Grace reminding her that Commander Yao wouldn't stand for an unwilling member being added to his crew is to call Yao annoying and then immediately monologue about how she'll skirt around it. This Stratt is not someone who's eager to dismiss Grace. She's just busy saving the world. I think about how Ava leans into Grace's energy, how she encourages these little claps, how she's sure to give him credit and acknowledgement, how she bought the little team hats, and even their final conversation is not a bitter yelling match about how inadequate Grace is, but an unspoken apology because she knows this is horrible and unfair. 3 hours isn't Ava rushing Grace's choice, ready and eager to wash her hands of him. This time limit is a reflection of the circumstances of the world. Grace has 3 hours because there's a launch schedule, and Stratt cannot stop the planet's rotation to give them more time for Grace to ponder while the optimal launch alignment passes them by. I know the launch is technically in 3 days, but that's 3 days to prep the new guy to get on the launch, and for Carl to cry while packing him Skittles. Ava's window comes from fighting the time limit the universe and Project Hail Mary have put on their desperate bid to save their son. The doomsday of it all is a big factor to consider, is what I'm saying. And it's Grace versus the world, after all. Ultimately, Grace is sent because he's the most qualified guy left, and Ava in the movie is fond of Grace. She respects and believes in him.
They have a great teacher. Can you take the compliment, please? It's an order. Okay.
Okay.
You see that she mirrors Grace a little by also having a hard time with people, and that comes majorly into play when you have to consider her position. Ultimately, she's Grace's boss. She's the head of the Petrova task force. She has more than her relationship with Grace to think about. She has to make a hard call in desperate times and lose a man she believed in and probably considered a friend. That's why I love that she throws this line at him.
If you don't go, you die anyway.
Yeah, but I die in 30 years with
the rest of us. You have no immediate family. You don't even have a dog.
Because it's so distancing and blindsiding after you've seen him make real bonds with Ava. But it cuts into this idea that Grace wouldn't have anyone to stay for the end of the world with, so add it to the list of good reasons to send him. This is Ava making intentional distance in my mind. There's this unspoken implication that if maybe Grace had a wife and kids, this would be a more hesitant choice or a longer conversation, but he doesn't. He just has his kids from his school, his home life, and the friends he made on the task force, which either include Ava and Carl or exclusively them. And they're not enough. Ava won't let her friendship count as a worthwhile attachment to consider compromising the mission for. The 3-hour scene has 2 major thematic parts to it, which is the 3 hours in itself and the denial of Grace's choice because Grace cannot choose to commit to the self-sacrifice of the one-way trip, which I feel like I should say out loud at least once is very understandable. But it's also something that makes his relationship with Rocky such a marvel. Rocky is another lone traveler in space trying to solve the problem that Grace has. And throughout the movie, Grace will have to incrementally push himself outside of his comfort zone to get closer to Rocky. He will do more and more brave things step by step, and Rocky will meet him on that journey. They're equals who are able to draw from each other's strengths to complete the mission, and I'd argue bring out the best in one another. As much as I really don't like that ultimate framing that Grace needed someone to be brave for as the crux of his issues, I like how it's paid off here, because Rocky becomes Grace's person, and yes, that's proven in action. Not only when they work together to save their stars, or when they confide in each other, but when they risk their lives for one another. They love each other wholeheartedly and are willing to give everything to each other. And that reciprocity is something Grace does not demonstrably have on Earth. Someone who is going to be brave for him, who will be willing to risk themselves for him. Though I do think this exists in a smaller, more day-to-day degree with the karaoke scene in Stratt, by the way, but I'm trying to be nice about the to be brave for framing, because apparently this doesn't count in the movie's logic, and I'm not mad, don't worry about that. Anyway, symbolically and thematically, it makes sense and is satisfying that Rocky and Grace risking their lives for each other is how they demonstrate their deep connection and bravery. I like how that moment pays off, and I think it's this moment, the moment where Grace chooses to chase after Rocky to save his ship, giving up his way home, that is much more comparable to the moment of Grace's autonomy being taken from him when he refused to volunteer for the one-way trip. Because in both circumstances, the people Grace cared for are there at the center of it. Can his bonds overcome his fears? And I'd like to re-emphasize that it's understandable that Grace was reluctant to give up his life and afraid to die in space. Stratt wasn't enough. His students weren't enough. His personal life wasn't enough. Which makes the fact that Rocky is enough for Grace momentous. Grace just chooses to give up his ride home of his own volition. Rocky doesn't even have to ask Grace to help him, to give up his life for him for his sake. He just does it, because Rocky is worth it. The difference between Grace's choices in this particular parallel is what I think of when I think about how much Grace values Rocky. Because to me, this is the moment he chooses the love he has for Rocky over the love he has for living on Earth. And I feel like the counter may be that Grace is the only one in a position to do anything for Rocky, but Grace is also framed as the only one in a position to serve as the scientist on the Hail Mary mission, so it is basically the same position. And he didn't choose Erid and Rocky out of spite for Earth.
As the Iridians say.
Grace doesn't owe Stratt or Project Hail Mary his forgiveness, though he gives it to them. I kinda wish that they had Stratt in jail for this scene, by the way, now unaffiliated and scapegoated by the Petrova Task Force, to drive home how the book understood what it was doing with the sacrifice of both Stratt and Grace as individuals. But even on principle, if Grace never forgave, I dislike this notion that some people have that Grace on the speech should be eager to dismiss Earth as if there was nothing he was capable of valuing there. As if he didn't love nature or have his own life and hobbies on Earth, or as if truly that lack of markers of social success should quantify his life or are fixed aspects of his being forever. It's great that Rocky is Grace's person whom he can relate to and love on a deeper level than anything he ever found on Earth, and it inspired his bravery. But I also don't super love that framing for the implications it has for Earth. The movie tries to sidestep the more prevalent notion in the book that Grace is an absolute loser who's too cowardly to live life on Earth, and shooting him into space quote unquote fixes him. In trying to patch up that implication, we get a much closer Stratt to Grace than we got in the book, and his refusal to go onto the Hail Mary has more of a self-confidence issue in the dialogue than a strict bravery one.
This might be very hard for you to understand, but some people are failures. Some people don't rise to the challenge.
And they try to give this ask the emotional weight it deserved and make the unfairness evident. But it still leaves that line that Grace needs someone to be brave for. And the big issue to me is that it frames every relationship Grace has demonstrably had on Earth as canonically not being enough. That's even the language I've been using in this video because that's how the choice is presented in the text. It reduces his question of committing himself to the one-way trip on if he cares enough about the thing he's going to be saving. It dismisses his greater confidence or the logistics of the situation he was in, and it reduces the impact of his developed capabilities or his simple desire to do the right thing. Like, the result of buying into that framing annoys me when people talk about Grace being a coward here, and it also annoys me when they use that same framing to say Grace had nothing of value on Earth to go back to when he's sitting on the beach here. The book feels a lot more somber, in my opinion, where it feels more like a matter of settling after logistics have more or less locked him in place. But using this parallel here, where Grace is given 3 hours to choose to die for others, and this narrow time limit as the ultimate insult, is paralleled by Grace not even having to be asked to die to save Rocky. Rocky's ask on the beach scene is asking Grace to weigh emotionally his love for Earth and Erid, to reflect on if he has any lingering regrets or longing for home. And it feels so weird if you insist there should be absolutely nothing on the Earth side of the scale because of the actions of the Petrova Task Force. A government project is not your entire life. I thought that was the entire consensus around why this ask was so screwed up. The difference here in this question and response to Grace's ask, the key difference that makes this moment's parallel to the 3-hour moment matter to me, is the fact that when Grace asks for more time to consider, Rocky says to think about it for a long time, probably for however long he wants. There is no time limit. There is no rush. The world isn't ending. The stars aren't dying anymore. And Grace won't suffer if he stays on Erid, and Erid won't suffer if Grace doesn't leave. The big choices have already passed. The one-way trips have been survived. Grace can take all the time he needs to choose to go back to his home or not from a logistical standpoint. The only problem will be Grace feeling like he's too old and settled on Erid. This is a respect for Grace's autonomy, yes, but it's easy. It's not a difficult thing for Rocky to give Grace because of the circumstances surrounding them. To me, this scene and this ultimatum isn't about comparing Grace's relationship to Rocky to what relationships he left back on Earth. This is a signal that they've succeeded in their mission, that all is well and they don't have to rush anymore. They can take things at their own pace. Rocky's enthusiastic encouragement of Grace's hesitance is not at all the same as Stratt's tearful denial. Rocky and Stratt both presumably would have rather had Grace on their planets. The world dying around Stratt didn't allow it, but the world Grace and Rocky saved does.